Introduction. Drifting into the Kingdom of Ndongo. Please take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel so that we may be able to bring you more African bedtime stories. Tonight, we travel back in time, far beyond the busy roads, glowing screens, and endless notifications of the modern world, far beyond the cities and towns we know today. We journey to a place where rivers move quietly through vast forests, where the stars shine brightly above the land, and where one remarkable woman would grow to become one of the greatest leaders in African history. So settle in, get comfortable, allow your thoughts to slow down like a gentle river flowing beneath the moon. Take a deep breath and let us drift together into the Kingdom of Ndongo. Imagine for a moment that you are standing beside a quiet river in Central Africa more than 400 years ago. The night is peaceful. The air is warm. Tall grasses sway softly in the breeze. Moonlight dances across the surface of the water, turning the river into a ribbon of silver that winds through the darkness. The forest nearby is alive with gentle sounds. A distant bird calls from the trees. Leaves rustle softly overhead. The water flows steadily onward, as it has for countless generations. There are no engines, no traffic, no alarms reminding anyone to do anything. Only the sounds of nature and the peaceful rhythm of life. This is the world we enter tonight. A world that existed long before many of the countries we know today. A world filled with kingdoms, traditions, traders, farmers, storytellers, and leaders. A world that many people never learned about in school. And at the center of our story is a woman whose name deserves to be remembered. Queen Nzinga, sometimes called Nzinga, a ruler, a diplomat, a strategist, a warrior, and one of the most fascinating women in African history. Now, when people hear the words warrior queen, they often imagine someone charging into battle every morning before breakfast. Perhaps while carrying a spear and looking very dramatic. But Queen Nzinga's greatest strength was not simply her courage, it was her intelligence. She knew how to negotiate. She knew how to build alliances. She knew how to lead people through difficult times. And she knew how to stand firm when powerful empires expected her to surrender. That is one reason her story has survived for centuries. Tonight, we will follow her journey from childhood to queenship. We will explore the world that shaped her. We will visit the Kingdom of Ndongo, a powerful African kingdom located in what is now Angola. This kingdom was home to the Mbundu people, whose communities stretched across rivers, forests, and fertile lands. Life here was connected to the natural world. The rivers provided water and transportation. The forest provided food, shelter, and resources. Families worked together. Villages shared traditions, and stories passed from one generation to the next around evening fires. The people of Ndongo had their own customs, beliefs, leaders, and ways of life long before Europeans arrived on their shores. Yet this was also a time of change. Across the ocean, powerful nations were expanding their influence. New trade routes connected distant parts of the world. Merchants traveled great distances. Ships crossed vast waters. And foreign powers increasingly looked toward Africa. Some came seeking trade. Some came seeking wealth. And some came seeking control. These changes would eventually reach the Kingdom of Ndongo. And when they did, the future of the kingdom would be tested in ways no one could have imagined. But that part of the story comes later. For now, let us remain beside the quiet river. The moon continues to shine overhead. The forest rests peacefully around us. The water flows calmly toward places unknown. Somewhere in the distance, a village settles into sleep. Children listen to stories. Families gather together. Elders share wisdom that has been carried through generations. And somewhere in this world, a young girl named Nzinga is about to begin a journey that will one day make her famous across Africa and beyond. She does not know it yet. No one does. The future remains hidden, just beyond the horizon. Like the river before us, her path will twist and turn. There will be challenges. There will be victories. There will be moments that change history. But tonight, we begin at the beginning. A peaceful land, a quiet river, a kingdom beneath the stars, and a young girl who would grow into one of Africa's greatest queens. So let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts drift like moonlight across calm water. And together, let us step into the ancient Kingdom of Ndongo, where the remarkable story of Queen Nzinga is about to unfold. Chapter 1. Before the oceans had a queen. Long before great ships crossed the seas, long before fishermen cast their nets into the water, and long before people stood on beaches wondering what secrets might lie beyond the horizon, the world was a very different place. The old storytellers often spoke of a time when everything was still becoming itself. The mountains were young. The forests were growing. The rivers had not yet found all their paths. Even the oceans seemed quieter than they are today. If you close your eyes for a moment, imagine standing at the edge of creation itself. The sky stretches endlessly above. The stars shine brightly. A soft breeze moves across the land. And somewhere in the distance, the very first waters begin to gather. Not oceans. Not yet. Only tiny streams. Small pools. Gentle trickles moving across the earth. The world was waking up. Slowly, patiently, as nature often does. The old stories tell us that water was one of the first great gifts. Where water traveled, life followed. Plants grew. Animals gathered. The earth became green and full of possibility. Even then, water seemed to understand something important. It knew how to bring life wherever it went. A tiny stream became a river. A river became many rivers. And together they began carving paths through forests, valleys, and open lands. The waters moved without hurry. Water has never been known for rushing. It always seems confident that it will arrive exactly where it needs to be. Perhaps that is why people have found rivers so calming for thousands of years. The storytellers believed these first waters were special. They connected everything. The rain fed the streams fed the rivers. The rivers eventually found the sea. Every drop belonged to a larger journey. And so the earth slowly filled with water. Lakes reflected the stars. Rivers carried life across the land. The oceans grew larger and deeper. The world became beautiful. But there was a problem. The waters were powerful, perhaps too powerful. The rivers needed guidance. The oceans needed balance. The tides needed wisdom. The old storytellers believed that every important part of creation required a guardian. Someone to watch over it. Someone to care for it. Someone to help keep harmony in the world. This is where the Orishas entered the stories. The Orishas were powerful spiritual beings who each carried unique responsibilities. Some guided the winds, some watched over fire, some protected forests and animals. Others brought wisdom, healing, courage, or knowledge. The world was like a great village, and each Orisha had an important role to play. One might guide the storms, another might watch over travelers, another might help people find strength during difficult times. Each gift helped keep balance. Each responsibility mattered. But among all these duties, one remained unclaimed. Who would watch over the waters? Who would care for the rivers that crossed the earth? Who would guide the mighty ocean stretching beyond sight? Who would listen to the hopes carried by the tides? The seas needed more than power. They needed compassion. The rivers needed more than direction. They needed understanding. The waters needed a mother. The old storytellers imagined the oceans waiting. The waves rolled gently. The tides rose and fell. The rivers continued their journeys. But all of them seemed to be expecting someone kind, someone wise, someone strong enough to hold the worries of the world without becoming overwhelmed by them. And then she arrived, not with thunder, not with a great battle, not with shouting or celebration. She arrived like a gentle wave touching the shore, quiet, graceful, peaceful. This was Yemaya, the future mother of the waters, the future queen of the sea, the future guardian of rivers, oceans, tides, and all the life connected to them. The old stories describe her as calm but powerful, gentle but strong, kind but unshakable. The moment she entered the world, the waters seemed to recognize her. The rivers flowed more smoothly. The oceans became balanced. The tides moved with purpose. The sea had finally found its guardian. Yemaya understood the language of water. She listened to rivers as they traveled across the land. She listened to rain falling from the sky. She listened to waves whispering against the shore. Nothing was too small for her attention. A tiny stream mattered. A great ocean mattered. Every drop mattered. That became one of the most important lessons in her stories. Small things matter. Tiny acts of kindness matter. Quiet moments matter. A single drop of water may seem small, yet countless drops create rivers. Countless rivers create oceans. The storytellers loved this lesson because it reminded people that greatness often begins with small things. A kind word, a helping hand, a patient heart. Like water, these things grow over time. Soon, life flourished beneath Yemaya's care. Fish filled the rivers. Creatures swam through the oceans. Plants grew along river banks. The waters became pathways connecting different parts of the world. Travelers followed rivers. Villages grew beside them. Families depended on them. And through it all, Yemaya watched over her vast watery kingdom, not as a ruler demanding attention, but as a mother offering protection, a mother guiding life gently forward. Now imagine standing beside those ancient waters. The sky is beginning to brighten. The stars slowly fade. The first hint of dawn appears on the horizon. The rivers flow quietly. The ocean rests peacefully. Everything feels calm. Everything feels balanced. The waters have found their guardian. The sea has found its mother. And somewhere in the distance, Yemaya watches over it all. As the world welcomes a new day, the journey of the Ocean Mother has begun. Chapter 2. The Princess Who Loved to Learn. Long before she became a queen, long before diplomats listened carefully to her words, and long before powerful empires learned to respect her determination, Nzinga was simply a curious young girl growing up in the Kingdom of Ndongo. The moon still rose over the rivers. The forest still stretched across the land. The people of Ndongo continued their daily lives, farming, trading, raising families, and sharing stories passed down through generations. And somewhere among them was a young princess who seemed to ask more questions than anyone else. Now, every family has someone like this. The child who always wants to know why. Why is the river flowing that way? Why do birds fly south? Why does grandmother know the answer to everything? And perhaps most importantly, why must chores happen every single day? Young Nzinga was very much that kind of child. She was curious about the world around her. She paid attention. She listened. She observed things that others sometimes overlooked. The elders noticed this quickly. While other children often rushed off to play, Nzinga was just as likely to sit nearby and listen to conversations between older people. Not because she was trying to be serious. She simply wanted to understand how the world worked. The Kingdom of Ndongo was a place filled with knowledge. Some knowledge was written. Much of it was shared through memory and storytelling. The elders carried history in their minds. They remembered leaders who had ruled before. They remembered difficult seasons and prosperous years. They remembered lessons learned from both success and failure. When they spoke, people listened, and young Nzinga listened more carefully than most. In the evenings, families often gathered around fires. The air cooled as darkness settled across the land. Children sat close to parents and grandparents. The fire crackled softly. The stars filled the sky overhead, and stories began. Some stories explained how things came to be. Some taught lessons about courage or honesty. Others were simply entertaining. After all, even centuries ago, people enjoyed a good story. Human beings have always appreciated a tale that keeps everyone awake just a little longer than they planned. The storytellers spoke of heroes, leaders, clever animals, wise ancestors, and great journeys. Nzinga loved hearing them all. But she did more than listen. She remembered. Years later, many people would notice how quickly she could understand complicated situations. Part of that skill began right here, sitting beside those evening fires. Stories taught her to think. They taught her to look beneath the surface. They taught her that every problem often has more than one solution. As she grew older, Nzinga's education expanded. She learned about leadership. She learned about the customs and traditions of her people. She learned how communities work together. She learned how trade connected different regions. The Kingdom of Ndongo was not isolated from the world. Merchants traveled great distances. Goods moved across trade routes. Different peoples met and exchanged ideas. Understanding these relationships was important. Nzinga seemed eager to learn all of it. One area especially fascinated her: language. Words have power. The right words can calm an argument. The right words can build trust. The right words can help two people understand one another. The wrong words can create quite a mess. This has probably been true since the beginning of human history. Nzinga quickly recognized the value of communication. She learned the languages spoken around her. She paid attention to how people negotiated agreements. She observed how leaders settled disagreements. She watched how diplomats represented their kingdoms. Even as a young girl, she seemed to understand that leadership was not only about giving orders. It was also about listening. This would become one of her greatest strengths. Another thing that made Nzinga unusual was her willingness to learn skills that many people expected only boys to practice. In many societies, certain activities were traditionally associated with men. Yet Nzinga was not interested in limiting herself. If boys were learning strategy, she wanted to learn strategy. If boys were practicing physical skills, she wanted to practice too. If boys were being prepared for leadership, she wanted to understand those lessons as well. The adults around her quickly realized something important. Nzinga was capable, very capable. She learned quickly. She worked hard, and she was not easily discouraged. If a task proved difficult, she simply tried again, and then again, and sometimes again after that. History often remembers great leaders for the dramatic moments later in their lives. The famous speeches, the important decisions, the remarkable victories. But those moments usually begin much earlier. They begin with habits, curiosity, patience, observation, learning. Young Nzinga was building all of those qualities without even knowing where they would eventually lead. The people around her began noticing signs of leadership. Children often turned to her when deciding what game to play. Friends listened when she offered suggestions. Adults noticed her confidence. She spoke thoughtfully. She treated others with respect. She paid attention when people shared ideas. Leadership, after all, is not only about being heard. It is also about hearing others. Nzinga seemed to understand this naturally. Perhaps the most important thing she learned during these years was how to balance strength and wisdom. Strength alone can create fear. Wisdom alone may go unheard. But together, they become powerful. The elders often spoke about balance. The river flows because it balances movement and patience. The forest grows because it balances strength and renewal. Good leaders must find balance too. Young Nzinga absorbed these lessons like a sponge soaking up water. Each story, each conversation, each observation, each new skill, all of it was quietly preparing her for the future. Of course, she could not see that future yet. She did not know the challenges waiting ahead. She did not know that one day she would negotiate with governors, command armies, and lead a kingdom through difficult times. For now, She was simply a young princess sitting beside a fire, listening, learning, watching the sparks rise into the night sky. The stars shined above the Kingdom of Ndongo. The rivers flowed quietly through the darkness. The elders shared one final story before sleep, and among the children gathered there sat a young girl whose curiosity would one day help shape history. The future Queen Nzinga was learning, and her remarkable journey had only just begun. Chapter 3. A Kingdom Under Pressure. The Kingdom of Ndongo was beautiful. Its rivers flowed through rich lands. Its forests stretched across the horizon. Its villages and towns were filled with families, farmers, traders, craftsmen, and storytellers. At first glance, life seemed peaceful, and in many ways, it was. Children still played beside rivers. Elders still gathered to share wisdom. Families still sat together beneath the stars after long days of work. But sometimes, even the calmest river carries signs of a coming storm. Far away, beyond the coastline of Central Africa, powerful nations were changing. Ships crossed oceans more often than ever before. Merchants searched for new trade routes. Kings and queens in Europe looked toward distant lands with growing interest. Among them were the Portuguese. The Portuguese had first arrived along parts of Africa's western coast many years earlier. At first, much of their interest focused on trade. They wanted goods, they wanted resources, they wanted opportunities to expand their influence. As ships continued arriving, relationships between local African kingdoms and Portuguese traders became increasingly complicated. Some trade brought benefits. New goods appeared. New connections were formed. But alongside trade came problems. Large problems. The kind that often begin quietly before becoming impossible to ignore. One of the darkest developments was the growing slave trade. Human beings were bought and sold as if they were objects. Families were separated. Communities were disrupted. Entire regions felt the impact. The old storytellers would later remember this period with sadness, because behind every number was a person, a mother, a father, a child, a friend, a neighbor. The Kingdom of Ndongo found itself increasingly affected by these changes. Pressure began building. The Portuguese wanted greater influence. Local leaders sought to protect their people and maintain their independence. The balance became harder and harder to maintain. For young Nzinga, these developments became impossible to ignore. She was growing older now, no longer the small child sitting quietly beside evening fires. She still loved learning. She still listened carefully. But now she was beginning to understand something important. Leadership was not only about ceremonies and celebrations. Leadership also meant dealing with difficult situations. Sometimes very difficult situations. As tensions grew, conflicts appeared in different parts of the region. Neighboring groups competed for resources. Alliances shifted. Old rivalries sometimes returned. The political landscape became increasingly complicated. Trying to keep track of every alliance and disagreement probably required the patience of a saint and the memory of several elephants working together. Fortunately, many leaders spent years learning how to navigate such challenges. Nzinga paid close attention. She watched carefully as decisions were made. She observed how leaders negotiated. She noticed which choices brought stability and which created new problems. At the center of much of this activity stood her father. Nzinga's father was a ruler of Ndongo. As king, he carried enormous responsibilities. He had to think about trade, diplomacy, security, agriculture, relationships with neighboring peoples, and increasingly, the growing presence of foreign powers. Being a ruler was not an easy job. Many people imagine kings spending their days sitting on impressive chairs while others do all the work. History suggests otherwise. Good rulers often spend most of their time solving problems, and there were plenty of problems to solve. The royal court became a place where important discussions took place. Messengers arrived with news. Advisors shared recommendations. Leaders debated difficult decisions. Every choice carried consequences. Young Nzinga often listened closely. The court was one of the greatest classrooms she could have imagined. No textbook could teach what she learned there. She watched how experienced leaders spoke carefully. She observed how disagreements were handled. She noticed that strength often came from patience rather than anger. One lesson became especially clear. The world was changing, and the future would require strong leadership. The Kingdom of Ndongo faced challenges from multiple directions. External pressure was increasing. Internal disagreements sometimes emerged. Economic concerns grew more complicated. New political realities appeared. The leaders of tomorrow would need wisdom, courage, and flexibility. Without realizing it, Nzinga was preparing for exactly that role. The old storytellers often compared this period to watching dark clouds gather beyond distant hills. At first the sky still looks bright. The air still feels calm. Birds continue singing. Life goes on. But somewhere in the distance, change is coming. You can feel it. The Kingdom of Ndongo stood in that moment, not yet in the middle of the storm, but aware that one might be approaching. Many people worried. Others hoped for peaceful solutions. Most simply tried to continue their daily lives, while leaders searched for answers. Meanwhile, Nzinga continued learning. Every conversation became valuable. Every meeting revealed something new. Every challenge offered a lesson. She learned that power without wisdom could be dangerous. She learned that diplomacy could prevent conflicts. She learned that understanding people was often more useful than trying to control them. Most importantly, she learned that difficult times reveal the true character of leaders. Anyone can lead when life is easy. The real test comes when problems arrive. The future Queen Nzinga was beginning to understand this truth. The rivers of Ndongo continued flowing quietly through the land. Villages remained busy. Families gathered together each evening. The stars still appeared overhead. Yet beneath the surface, change was moving steadily forward. The kingdom stood at a crossroads. The decisions made during these years would shape generations to come. And somewhere within the royal court, a young woman watched, listened, and learned. She could not yet know exactly what the future held. She could not know the challenges waiting ahead. She could not know that one day she would become one of the most respected leaders in African history. But the lessons were already taking root. Like seeds planted before the rainy season, quietly, patiently, preparing for the day they would be needed. As night settles across the Kingdom of Ndongo, imagine those distant hills beneath a moonlit sky. The rivers flow softly, the villages grow quiet, the stars shine above. And far beyond the horizon, storm clouds gather slowly, reminding everyone that great leaders are often shaped long before the storm finally arrives. Chapter 4. The famous meeting. As the years passed, the Kingdom of Ndongo continued facing difficult challenges. The pressure from outside powers was growing. Trade relationships had become more complicated. The future seemed uncertain, and within the royal family important changes were taking place. Young Nzinga was no longer simply a curious child, sitting beside evening fires listening to stories. She had grown into a thoughtful and intelligent woman. She understood politics. She understood diplomacy. And she understood that the decisions made by leaders could affect thousands of lives. These skills would soon be tested. After the death of Nzinga's father, her brother became ruler of Ndongo. He inherited a kingdom facing enormous challenges. The Portuguese continued expanding their influence in the region. Conflicts threatened stability. The slave trade continued growing. Every decision seemed to carry serious consequences. Leading a kingdom during such times was not easy. It was rather like trying to balance a full basket on your head while walking across a narrow bridge during a windy afternoon. Possible, perhaps, but certainly not relaxing. The new ruler needed help. The kingdom needed solutions. And among all the people in Ndongo, one person stood out: Nzinga. By this point, her intelligence had become well known. People respected her judgment. They admired her confidence. Most importantly, they trusted her ability to speak with wisdom and clarity. When an opportunity arose to negotiate with the Portuguese, Nzinga was chosen to represent the kingdom. This was an extraordinary responsibility. She would travel as an ambassador. She would meet directly with powerful foreign leaders. She would speak on behalf of her people. The future of the kingdom might depend on the outcome. For many people, such a mission would have been intimidating. Very intimidating. The sort of situation that might cause a person to suddenly remember several urgent reasons why someone else should probably go instead. But Nzinga accepted the responsibility. She understood what was at stake. So preparations began. Messengers carried information. Plans were made. Travel arrangements were organized. And soon, Nzinga set out on the journey that would become one of the most famous moments in African history. Imagine the scene. The road stretched through forests and open land. Rivers crossed the countryside. Villages appeared and disappeared along the road. The journey took time. Travel in the 17th century did not involve comfortable seats, air conditioning, or convenient snacks every few miles. People traveled with patience. Fortunately, patience was one of Nzinga's strengths. As she traveled, she likely thought about the conversations ahead. The Portuguese governor represented a powerful foreign presence. The meeting would require skill. Every word would matter. Every gesture would matter. Diplomacy is often described as the art of conversation, but it is also the art of understanding people. Nzinga understood this very well. Eventually she arrived at the place where the meeting would occur. The governor's hall was prepared. Officials gathered. Advisors waited nearby. The atmosphere was formal and serious. This was not an ordinary conversation. This was a meeting between leaders. And it was here that one of history's most famous diplomatic moments took place. According to the traditional story, when Nzinga entered the room, she noticed something important. The Portuguese governor was seated on a chair, a proper chair, a symbol of authority and status, but no chair had been provided for her. Instead, a mat had been placed on the floor. The message was clear. The arrangement suggested that she was expected to sit lower than the governor, to appear less important, less powerful, less equal. Now, some people might have accepted the situation. Others might have become angry. Still others might have spent the next hour thinking of clever responses they wished they had said. Nzinga chose a different approach, a brilliant approach. Without creating a scene, one of her attendants knelt beside her. Nzinga calmly sat upon the attendant's back, raising herself to the same level as the governor. Suddenly, the balance of the room changed. The message was equally clear. She would not be treated as less than an equal representative of her kingdom. She would negotiate from a position of dignity. It was a moment of remarkable confidence, a moment that people would remember for centuries. Whether every detail happened exactly as later storytellers described, the story captures something important about Nzinga's character. She was intelligent. She was calm under pressure, and she understood symbolism. She knew that leadership often involves much more than words. The meeting continued. Discussions took place. Negotiations unfolded. Nzinga listened carefully. She spoke thoughtfully. She represented her people with skill and confidence. The Portuguese governor quickly realized he was dealing with an extraordinary diplomat. This was not someone who could be easily dismissed. This was not someone who would be intimidated. This was a leader. One of the goals of the negotiations was to reduce conflict between Ndongo and the Portuguese. Nzinga worked hard to achieve peaceful solutions. She understood that war often brought suffering. Diplomacy offered another path. Not an easy path, but sometimes a better one. The discussions resulted in agreements that provided hope for greater stability. Whether those agreements would ultimately succeed was another question entirely. History has a habit of being complicated. But in that moment, Nzinga had accomplished something remarkable. She had represented her kingdom with dignity. She had demonstrated extraordinary diplomatic skill, and she had earned respect from people who may not have expected it. The journey home must have felt very different from the journey out. She left as an ambassador. She returned as something more, a figure whose reputation had grown considerably, a woman whose intelligence had become impossible to ignore. As night settles over Ndongo once again, imagine a quiet hall lit by lanterns. The conversations have ended. The officials have departed. The room has grown silent, yet the memory remains. a woman sitting proudly as an equal among powerful men, a leader refusing to bow to expectations, a future queen showing the world exactly who she was. And this, as history would soon reveal, was only the beginning of Queen Nzinga's remarkable story. Chapter 5. The woman who refused to bow. When Nzinga returned home from her famous meeting with the Portuguese governor, many people viewed her differently. She had always been intelligent. She had always been respected. But now something had changed. Her name was being spoken far beyond the royal court. People had heard about the negotiations. They had heard about her confidence, and of course, they had heard the famous story about the chair. Stories travel quickly, sometimes faster than the people involved would prefer. But in this case, the story helped spread a powerful message. Nzinga was not someone who could be easily overlooked. The Kingdom of Ndongo still faced serious challenges. The negotiations had created opportunities for peace. Agreements had been discussed. Promises had been made. But history often reminds us that agreements are one thing, and keeping them is another. The relationship between Ndongo and the Portuguese remained complicated. Both sides had different goals. Both sides wanted security. Both sides wanted influence. Finding common ground required patience, skill, and determination. Fortunately, Nzinga seemed to possess all three. The old storytellers often described her as someone who understood that strength comes in many forms. Some leaders rely on force, others rely on fear. Nzinga relied on intelligence. She listened carefully. She studied situations from multiple angles. She understood that rushing into decisions often creates more problems than it solves. This did not mean she was weak. Far from it. It simply meant she knew that wisdom could be just as powerful as a sword, perhaps even more powerful. After all, a wise decision can prevent a conflict before it begins. That is a very useful skill, especially if you prefer sleeping peacefully at night. And peaceful sleep is something every bedtime story can appreciate. As tensions continued throughout the region, Nzinga remained focused on protecting Ndongo's independence. This was one of her greatest concerns. She wanted her people to govern themselves. She wanted their traditions, communities, and way of life to remain strong. The growing influence of foreign powers created constant challenges. Every agreement required careful thought. Every negotiation required patience. Every decision carried risks. The political world of Central Africa during this period was incredibly complex. Alliances shifted. Leaders formed partnerships. Conflicts emerged. New opportunities appeared. The situation often changed quickly. Imagine trying to play a game where the rules occasionally changed while you were still learning them. That would be frustrating. Yet leaders like Nzinga faced similar challenges on a much larger scale. She understood that survival required flexibility. A good leader cannot simply react to events. A good leader must think ahead. She must anticipate problems before they arrive. She must prepare for possibilities others have not yet considered. Nzinga seemed remarkably gifted in this area. People began noticing her political skills more and more. Advisors respected her judgment. Community leaders valued her perspective. Even those who disagreed with her often acknowledged her intelligence. Respect is an interesting thing. It cannot be demanded. It cannot be forced. It must be earned. And Nzinga was steadily earning it. One decision at a time. One conversation at a time. One challenge at a time. The Kingdom of Ndongo needed exactly this kind of leadership. The people were living through uncertain years. They wanted stability. They wanted security. They wanted hope for the future. Leaders who remain calm during difficult times often become sources of confidence for everyone around them. Nzinga possessed that calming presence. She did not panic when problems appeared. She looked for solutions. She asked questions. She gathered information. Then she acted carefully. The old storytellers admired this quality greatly. Many stories celebrate dramatic heroes charging into danger. And those stories certainly have their place. But there is another kind of courage. The courage to remain calm. The courage to think clearly when others are worried. The courage to keep moving forward, even when the future seems uncertain. Nzinga demonstrated that kind of courage repeatedly. As her reputation grew, more people began recognizing her leadership abilities. Some saw her as a skilled diplomat. Others saw her as a protector of her people. Many simply saw someone willing to stand firm when circumstances became difficult. And difficult circumstances continued arriving. The pressures facing Ndongo did not disappear overnight. The kingdom still faced political challenges. The region remained unstable. Important decisions still needed to be made. Yet through all of this, Nzinga continued building relationships and strengthening her position. She understood that leadership is rarely a single dramatic moment. Most leadership happens gradually. It is built through trust, consistency, integrity, and a willingness to serve something larger than yourself. These lessons would prove incredibly important in the years ahead, because the future held even greater challenges. The path before Nzinga was not becoming easier. In many ways, it was becoming more difficult. But every experience was preparing her. Every negotiation strengthened her skills. Every challenge expanded her understanding. Every success increased the confidence others placed in her leadership. The woman who had once sat beside evening fires listening to stories was becoming one of the most capable leaders in the kingdom. And people were beginning to notice. As night settles once again over the Kingdom of Ndongo, imagine a small flame burning steadily in the darkness. The wind may blow, storms may gather, the world around it may change, yet the flame continues burning, steady, calm, unwavering. The old storytellers often used this image when speaking about leaders like Nzinga, not because they were the loudest voices, not because they sought attention, but because they provided light during uncertain times. They helped others find their way forward. And in a world filled with challenges, that kind of leadership becomes priceless. The rivers continue flowing through the land. The stars shine above the forests. Villages settle into peaceful sleep. And somewhere within the kingdom, a future queen continues preparing for the remarkable role history has waiting for her. A woman who refused to bow. A woman who refused to surrender her dignity. A woman whose determination was becoming impossible to ignore. And her greatest chapters were still yet to come. Chapter 6. Becoming Queen. The first light of dawn has a special feeling. The world is quiet. The stars begin to fade. Birds slowly wake in the trees. The air feels fresh and full of possibility. It is a time between night and day, a moment when one chapter ends and another begins. For Nzinga, a similar moment was approaching. The Kingdom of Ndongo had already experienced years of uncertainty. Political tensions remained. Foreign powers continued seeking influence. The future seemed unclear. And within the royal family, important changes were taking place. The years following Nzinga's famous diplomatic mission were complicated. Leadership within the kingdom continued to shift. Decisions made by rulers carried enormous consequences. The pressures facing Ndongo had not disappeared. In many ways, they had grown even stronger. The kingdom needed stability. The people needed leadership. And increasingly, many eyes were turning toward Nzinga. By now, her reputation had spread throughout the region. People knew her as a skilled diplomat. They knew her as an intelligent strategist. They knew her as someone who remained calm when others became overwhelmed. These qualities earned respect. But respect alone does not make someone a ruler. The path to leadership is rarely simple. And Nzinga's path would be no exception. Changes within the royal family created opportunities, but they also created challenges. Questions about succession emerged. Different groups held different opinions. Various leaders supported different visions for the future. As often happens during times of transition, uncertainty filled the air. The old storytellers understood this well. Whenever leadership changes, people naturally wonder what comes next. Will the new leader be strong? Will they be wise? Will they protect the kingdom? Will they help communities thrive? These questions mattered deeply, especially during difficult times. Nzinga understood the weight of those questions. She knew that leadership was not a prize. It was a responsibility, a very large responsibility. The kind that can keep a person awake at night while everyone else is sleeping peacefully. Gradually, Nzinga rose to power. It was not simply because of her family connections. Many people throughout history have possessed important family names. Not all of them became respected leaders. Nzinga's rise happened because people believed in her abilities. They had seen her intelligence. They had witnessed her diplomacy. They had observed her courage. And they trusted her judgment. Still, becoming queen did not instantly solve every problem. In fact, some challenges became even more difficult. Not everyone accepted her authority. Some questioned whether a woman should lead during such uncertain times. Others had political ambitions of their own. Still others worried about the future and resisted change. Leadership often involves managing disagreements. And Nzinga quickly discovered that crowns do not come with magical powers that make everyone agree with you. If only it were that easy. History would be much shorter, and probably much less interesting. Instead, Nzinga relied on the skill she had spent years developing. She listened. She negotiated. She built relationships. She sought allies. She understood that strong leadership requires support. No ruler succeeds entirely alone. Even the greatest leaders depend on trusted advisors, loyal supporters, and strong communities. Nzinga worked carefully to strengthen those connections. She reached out to important leaders. She built alliances with those who shared her vision. She demonstrated that her goal was not personal power. Her goal was protecting the kingdom. People began responding to that message. Trust grew. Support expanded. Confidence increased. One of Nzinga's greatest strengths was her ability to inspire confidence during uncertain times. When people feel afraid, they often look to their leaders for reassurance. They want to know that someone is paying attention. Someone is making plans. Someone is thinking about tomorrow. Nzinga provided that sense of stability. She did not promise that every problem would disappear. Wise leaders rarely make such promises. Instead, she showed people that challenges could be faced with courage and intelligence. That approach earned respect. The people of Ndongo began seeing her not only as a member of the royal family. They began seeing her as their queen. The old storytellers often describe this period as the sunrise of Nzinga's reign. The comparison fits beautifully. Sunrise does not happen all at once. The sky slowly brightens. Colors begin to appear. Darkness gradually gives way to light. Likewise, Nzinga's leadership grew steadily, day by day, decision by decision, relationship by relationship. The kingdom slowly adjusted to this new chapter. Communities looked toward the future. Allies strengthened their support. The foundation of her reign became stronger. Of course, the challenges facing Ndongo had not disappeared. The Portuguese remained active in the region. Political tension still existed. Important decisions still lay ahead. But now the kingdom had a leader uniquely prepared to face them. Everything Nzinga had experienced up to this point had prepared her for this role. The stories she listened to as a child, the lessons learned beside village fires, the conversations in the royal court, the diplomatic mission to meet the Portuguese governor, the negotiations, the challenges, the successes, the failures. Each experience had become part of her education, and now that education would guide an entire kingdom. As evening falls across Ndongo, imagine the first dawn of Nzinga's reign. The rivers shimmer beneath the morning light. The forests stretch toward the horizon. Villages awaken to a new day. The people look toward the future. And standing at the center of it all is a woman who spent years preparing for this moment. A woman whose intelligence earned respect. A woman whose courage inspired confidence. A woman who had become queen. The sun rises higher above the kingdom. The day begins. And so does one of the most remarkable reigns in African history. The journey of Queen Nzinga has truly begun. Chapter 7. Building a new future. When people think about great leaders, they often imagine battles. They imagine dramatic speeches. They imagine moments that fill history books. And while those moments certainly happen, much of leadership involves something far less dramatic. Building, planning, preparing, thinking about tomorrow while everyone else is focused on today. After becoming queen, Nzinga understood something important. Protecting a kingdom was not only about surviving difficult times. It was also about creating a future worth protecting. The Kingdom of Ndongo had faced years of uncertainty. Outside pressures continued to grow. Political tensions remained. Communities had experienced hardship. Many families worried about what the future might bring. Nzinga wanted to change that. She wanted people to feel hopeful again. Not because hope solves problems by itself, but because hope gives people the strength to keep moving forward. So she began focusing on something very important: strengthening the kingdom. Now, strengthening a kingdom does not happen overnight. You cannot simply wake up one morning and announce, "Good news, everyone, everything is fixed." History would be much easier if it worked that way. Instead, progress usually comes one step at a time. One decision, one relationship, one opportunity, one improvement. Nzinga understood this. She focused on building strong foundations. The stronger the foundation, the stronger the future. One of her first priorities involved forming alliances. The world around Ndongo remained complicated. Different kingdoms and communities had different interests. Relationships shifted constantly. Wise leaders understood that cooperation could often achieve more than conflict. Nzinga excelled at building connections. She met with leaders. She negotiated agreements. She worked to create partnerships that benefited everyone involved. This required patience. It required trust. And sometimes it required having the same conversation multiple times until everyone finally agreed. Diplomacy has always involved a great deal of patience. Nzinga had plenty of it. The alliances she built helped create stability. People felt safer knowing they had friends and partners they could rely upon. The kingdom became stronger, not because it stood alone, but because it built relationships with others. This was one of Nzinga's greatest strengths. She understood that cooperation could be powerful. At the same time, she remained focused on protecting her communities. Many people throughout the region had been affected by years of conflict and uncertainty. Families had been displaced. Villages had faced challenges. Some people found themselves searching for safety and stability. Nzinga opened her kingdom to many of these individuals and families. She welcomed people who needed protection. She offered opportunities for communities to rebuild. The old storytellers often remembered this part of her reign with admiration, because leadership is not only about protecting land, it is also about protecting people. The families who need safety, the children who need opportunity, the communities that need hope. Nzinga understood this deeply. As more people arrived seeking stability, the kingdom continued growing. Villages expanded, markets became busier, new opportunities emerged. Trade played an important role in this growth. Trade had always connected different regions of Africa. Goods moved across rivers and roads. Merchants exchanged products, ideas, and information. Trade helped communities prosper. Nzinga recognized its importance. She worked to encourage commerce and strengthen economic connections. A successful kingdom needed more than military strength. It needed opportunity. It needed prosperity. It needed people who believed their future could be better than their past. Trade helped make that possible. Markets became lively places. Travelers arrived carrying goods from distant lands. Conversations filled the air. People exchanged news, ideas, and stories. Life continued moving forward, and with each passing year, the kingdom became more resilient. What made Nzinga especially remarkable was her ability to think beyond immediate problems. Many leaders become trapped by today's challenges. And to be fair, today's challenges can be very distracting. Problems tend to demand attention. But Nzinga looked further ahead. She thought about future generations. She thought about what kind of kingdom her people deserved. She thought about what would happen years from now. This long-term vision guided many of her decisions. The old storytellers often described her as someone who planted trees, whose shade she might never sit beneath. It is a beautiful image. Planting something today so future generations may benefit tomorrow. That is what great leaders often do. They think beyond themselves. They think beyond the present moment. They invest in a future they may never fully see. Nzinga's leadership reflected this kind of thinking. Her decisions were not only about surviving, they were about building, creating, strengthening, preparing. As her reputation continued growing, more people came to admire her leadership. Some admired her intelligence. Others admired her courage. Many admired her compassion. She had shown that strength and kindness could exist together. One did not require sacrificing the other. The kingdom began developing a renewed sense of confidence. People felt hopeful. Communities worked together. Alliances strengthened. Trade expanded. Families rebuilt their lives. Of course, challenges still existed. History rarely provides long periods without difficulties. The Portuguese remained active in the region. Political tensions had not vanished completely. Future conflicts still waited beyond the horizon. But the kingdom was stronger than before. Much stronger. And that strength came largely from Nzinga's vision. As the sun begins to set over Ndongo, imagine standing on a hill overlooking a growing city. The rivers shimmer in the golden light. Market stalls slowly close for the evening. Families return home. Children laugh as they race through the streets. Smoke rises gently from cooking fires. The day is ending, but the future feels bright. The kingdom is growing. The people are rebuilding. Hope is returning. And standing at the center of it all is a queen who refuses to think only about today. A queen who sees possibility where others see obstacles. A queen who understands that the strongest kingdoms are built not only with walls and armies, but with trust, opportunity, and vision. As the last sunlight fades beyond the horizon, Queen Nzinga continues her work, building a future that generations will remember long after the sun sets on this remarkable day. Chapter 8. The Queen Who Defied an Empire. By now, Queen Nzinga had already accomplished more than most leaders could dream of. She had negotiated with powerful officials. She had risen to the throne during difficult times. She had strengthened her kingdom. She had built alliances. She had helped communities find stability and hope. Many rulers would have been satisfied with such achievements. Nzinga was not most rulers. The greatest challenge of her life still lay ahead. As the years passed, Portuguese influence in the region continued growing. The settlements expanded, their ambitions expanded, and their desire for control expanded as well. The Kingdom of Ndongo was not the only African kingdom facing these pressures. Across the region, leaders found themselves making difficult decisions about how to respond. Some chose cooperation, some chose resistance. Many tried a combination of both. Nzinga understood that the situation was rarely simple. She knew that every choice carried consequences. But she also knew something else. She was determined to protect her people's independence. The old storytellers often describe her as a tree standing firmly against the wind. The storms may grow stronger, the branches may bend, but the roots remain planted deep in the earth. That was Nzinga, steady, determined, unwilling to surrender what mattered most. The challenges facing her kingdom became increasingly serious. Military pressure continued. Political pressure continued. Economic pressure continued. At times, it must have seemed as though every new sunrise brought another problem waiting to be solved. Most people would probably have asked for a vacation. Perhaps a very long vacation. Maybe somewhere with fewer political crises. Unfortunately for queens, history rarely offers such opportunities. Instead, Nzinga faced each challenge directly. One of her greatest strengths was her ability to adapt. Many leaders become trapped by old ways of thinking. They continue doing the same things even when circumstances change. Nzinga understood that flexibility was essential. She studied situations carefully. She adjusted strategies when necessary. She looked for opportunities others might miss. This made her an effective military leader, as well as a skilled diplomat. Now, when people hear the phrase military leader, they sometimes imagine someone constantly riding into battle with dramatic music playing in the background. History is usually less dramatic. Most successful military leadership involves planning, preparation, observation, patience, and a great deal of decision-making. Nzinga excelled in these areas. She understood the landscape. She understood her allies. She understood her opponents. Most importantly, she understood that every conflict required careful thought. Her ability to combine intelligence with courage made her a formidable leader. But perhaps her greatest achievement was not simply resisting powerful opponents. It was maintaining that resistance over many years. Years, not weeks, not months, years. Perseverance is often overlooked when people discuss greatness. Yet it may be one of the most important qualities of all. Anyone can be brave for a moment. Remaining determined year after year is something else entirely. Nzinga demonstrated that kind of perseverance repeatedly. The people around her noticed. Communities facing uncertainty looked to her for guidance. Families facing hardship looked to her for hope. Allies looked to her for leadership. She became more than a queen. She became a symbol. A reminder that difficult circumstances do not have to define the future. The old storytellers loved sharing stories about this part of her life. Not because every story ended perfectly. History rarely works that way. But because Nzinga showed what is possible when courage and wisdom work together. She inspired people, not through grand speeches alone, not through titles alone, but through her actions. People watched how she responded to challenges. They saw her determination. They saw her resilience. And they found strength in her example. This ability to inspire others became one of her greatest gifts. Leadership often works this way. The strongest leaders help others believe in themselves. They help communities believe that progress is possible. They help people see opportunities where fear once existed. Nzinga did exactly that. At the same time, she never abandoned diplomacy. This is one of the most remarkable parts of her story. Many people imagine diplomacy and strength as opposites. Nzinga understood they could work together. Sometimes negotiation was the best path. Sometimes firmness was necessary. A wise leader knows the difference. She continued building alliances. She continued seeking opportunities for peace. She continued looking for solutions that could protect her people. Yet she also remained prepared to defend her kingdom when necessary. This balance became one of the defining features of her leadership. Strength without wisdom can become reckless. Wisdom without strength can become ineffective. Nzinga combined both. That combination made her extraordinary. As the years passed, her reputation continued growing. Stories spread across the region. People spoke about her intelligence, her courage, her determination, her refusal to surrender, her ability to lead during difficult times. Eventually, her story traveled far beyond her own kingdom. Long after specific battles and political disputes were forgotten, people continued remembering Nzinga herself. That is often how legends are born. Not because someone never faces difficulties, but because they continue moving forward despite them. The old storytellers understood this. They knew that future generations would need examples of courage, examples of perseverance, examples of leadership. Queen Nzinga provided all three. As night settles across the land, imagine a series of campfires glowing beneath a peaceful African sky. Families gather together. Children listen closely. The stars shine overhead. An elder begins telling a story, not about a distant hero from a forgotten age, but about a queen whose determination became legendary. A queen who refused to give up. A queen who refused to surrender her people's future. A queen who balanced wisdom with strength. The fire crackles softly. The night grows quiet. And somewhere beyond the darkness, the story of Queen Nzinga continues spreading from one generation to the next. A story powerful enough to survive centuries. A story that transformed a ruler into a legend. The story of the queen who defied an empire. Chapter 9. The legacy of Queen Nzinga. Every river eventually reaches a place where its journey changes. Not where it ends, simply where it becomes part of something larger. The same is true for great leaders. There comes a time when their personal story begins to flow into history itself. For Queen Nzinga, that time eventually arrived. She had spent decades leading, negotiating, protecting, rebuilding, and resisting. She had faced challenges that would have exhausted many rulers. She had watched the world around her change again and again. Yet through it all, she remained determined. The years passed. Seasons came and went. The forests of Central Africa continued growing beneath the sun. The rivers continued flowing toward the sea, and Queen Nzinga entered the later years of her remarkable life. By this point, she was no longer simply a ruler. She had become something much larger, a symbol, a source of inspiration, a living reminder that courage and wisdom could exist in the same person. The people around her had watched her overcome challenge after challenge. They had seen her negotiate with powerful foreign leaders. They had seen her build alliances. They had seen her protect her kingdom through some of the most difficult years in its history. Most importantly, they had seen her refuse to give up. The old storytellers often admired this quality most of all. Persistence. The ability to continue moving forward when circumstances become difficult. It sounds simple, but it is one of the hardest things in the world. Many people can begin a journey. Far fewer can continue it year after year. Nzinga did exactly that. As she grew older, her experience became one of her greatest strengths. She had spent decades learning about leadership. She understood people. She understood politics. She understood the importance of planning for the future. And perhaps most importantly, she understood that every generation leaves something behind for the next. Some leave buildings, some leave wealth, some leave stories. Nzinga left something even greater. An example. Across Central Africa, her reputation continued spreading. People spoke about her leadership, her intelligence, her determination, her courage. Stories traveled from village to village, from community to community, from one generation to the next. Long before books became common, stories were often how history survived. A grandmother tells a story to her grandchildren. Those grandchildren grow older and tell the story to their children. And so the memory continues. The old storytellers became guardians of history, and Queen Nzinga became one of the stories they refused to let disappear. This is one reason her name survived. Many rulers have existed throughout history. Many kingdoms have risen and fallen. Yet only a few leaders remain widely remembered centuries later. Nzinga became one of them, not because she was perfect. No leader is. Not because every challenge ended exactly the way she wanted. History is rarely that kind. She is remembered because she faced extraordinary circumstances and refused to surrender her principles. That leaves an impression, even hundreds of years later. Her influence extended far beyond her own lifetime. Future generations looked to her example. Women saw proof that leadership was possible. Communities saw proof that resilience mattered. Leaders saw proof that intelligence and diplomacy could be just as important as military strength. The lessons of her life continued teaching long after her reign ended. The old storytellers often said that true leadership is measured by what remains after a leader is gone. By that standard, Nzinga's legacy was extraordinary. The values she demonstrated continued inspiring people. Courage, patience, determination, wisdom, adaptability, hope. These qualities never go out of style. They remain useful in every century, even today. One of the most remarkable things about Queen Nzinga's story is how relevant it still feels. People continue facing challenges. Communities continue experiencing change. Leaders continue making difficult decisions. the world continues testing resilience. And because these challenges remain familiar, her story remains meaningful. The details may change, the centuries may pass, but the lessons endure. Perhaps that is why the world still speaks her name. Not only in Angola, not only in Africa, but around the world. Historians study her, writers tell her story, students learn about her life. Artists celebrate her legacy. People continue discovering her remarkable journey. And each new generation adds another chapter to her memory. The river of history keeps flowing. And somehow Queen Nzinga continues traveling with it. The old storytellers loved that image. A great river moving steadily forward, carrying memories, carrying lessons, carrying stories that refuse to disappear. The story of Queen Nzinga became one of those stories. A story carried through centuries. A story that continues flowing onward. Now imagine the Kingdom of Ndongo at dusk. The sun settles low on the horizon. The rivers glow with golden light. The forests become quiet. Smoke rises gently from distant cooking fires. Families gather together as evening approaches. Children listen closely as elders begin sharing stories. Among those stories is one about a remarkable queen. A queen who faced powerful enemies. A queen who protected her people. A queen who built alliances and inspired confidence. A queen who never stopped believing in the future. The stars begin appearing overhead, one by one. The rivers continue their endless journey. The years continue passing. Empires rise, empires fall. Yet some stories remain. Queen Nzinga's story is one of them. Because courage leaves a mark, wisdom leaves a mark, resilience leaves a mark, and leaders who help shape history are never truly forgotten. As the night grows quiet and the river flows steadily onward beneath the stars, the legacy of Queen Nzinga continues its journey through time. A journey that began centuries ago. A journey still moving forward today. Like the river itself, always flowing. Always remembered. Always carrying its story into the future. Ending credits. Good night from the Kingdom of Ndongo. Our journey is coming to an end. The story of Queen Nzinga has carried us across rivers, through forests, into royal courts, and through some of the most remarkable moments in African history. But before we say goodnight, let us return to where we began. Imagine once again that quiet river flowing through the Kingdom of Ndongo. The moon hangs high above the water. The stars fill the sky. The air is calm. The world feels peaceful. The river moves steadily through the darkness, just as it has for countless generations. Its waters reflect the moonlight, like silver ribbons stretching into the distance. Along its banks, the forests rest quietly. The villages have grown silent. Families sleep peacefully beneath the stars, and somewhere within this beautiful landscape, the memory of Queen Nzinga still remains. Tonight, we followed her journey from childhood to leadership. We watched her grow from a curious young girl who loved to learn into one of the most respected rulers in African history. We sat beside evening fires as she listened to stories. We watched her learn from elders and leaders. We saw her develop the wisdom that would later guide an entire kingdom. We traveled with her to that famous diplomatic meeting where she showed the world that dignity cannot be taken from someone who refuses to surrender it. We watched her rise to power during difficult times. We watched her build alliances, strengthen communities, and protect her people. And we watched her face challenges that would have discouraged many others. Through it all, she remained determined. That determination became one of her greatest gifts. The old storytellers often said that courage is not the absence of fear. It is continuing forward even when the path is difficult. Queen Nzinga showed that kind of courage throughout her life. But she also showed wisdom. She understood the importance of listening, the importance of patience, the importance of thinking carefully before acting. She knew that strength alone was not enough. True leadership required balance, strength and compassion, confidence and humility, determination and understanding. These lessons remain valuable today, even centuries later, because every generation faces challenges. Every generation experiences uncertainty. Every generation must decide how it will respond when difficulties appear. That is one reason stories like Nzinga's continue to matter. They remind us what is possible. They remind us that resilience matters. They remind us that leadership can take many forms. And they remind us that history is filled with remarkable people whose stories deserve to be remembered. African history is rich with such stories. Stories of kingdoms and communities. Stories of scholars and explorers. Stories of queens and kings. Stories of courage, creativity, and perseverance. For far too long, many of these stories remained unknown to much of the world. Yet they are every bit as fascinating as the stories taught in traditional history books. Perhaps even more so, because they remind us how much there still is to learn, how many voices still deserve to be heard, and how many remarkable journeys still wait to be discovered. As our time together comes to a close, allow yourself to relax. Let the worries of the day drift away. Let your breathing slow. Let your mind become as calm as the river beneath the moonlight. And as you rest, carry a few gentle lessons from Queen Nzinga's life with you. The lesson of courage, the lesson of wisdom, the lesson of perseverance, the lesson of dignity, and the lesson that even one determined person can leave a mark upon history. Now let us end our journey with a few peaceful affirmations. Allow the words to settle softly in your mind, like leaves floating upon calm water. Like Queen Nzinga, may you stand tall in difficult times. Like the river, may you continue moving forward. Like the stars above Ndongo, may your light shine brightly. May wisdom guide your path and peace fill your heart. May courage and kindness travel with you always. Take one final slow breath. The river continues flowing. The stars continue shining. The Kingdom of Ndongo rests peacefully beneath the night sky. And the story of Queen Nzinga continues its journey through time, carried from one generation to the next, like a gentle current moving through the darkness. Thank you for joining this peaceful journey into African history. May your dreams be calm, may your sleep be restful, and may the wisdom of the past travel gently with you into the night. Good night from the Kingdom of Ndongo. And good night from the remarkable story of Queen Nzinga. The river flows onward. The stars glow softly above, and all is quiet. Fade gently into silence,